Hi there. I just thought today I'd go through a run through of a talk I'm giving tomorrow in Southampton. And it's basically the talk that I gave also in NDC this year in Oslo, which is a brilliant conference. And it's an introduction to MvvmCross. So it's about sharing C#, using MVVM, and using all of the modern platforms, Windows and Android and iOS, using C# really to its full potential. What I promised I'd do in this talk is I promised that I would give some introductions to MvVM, to portable class libraries, to the Xamarin products, to some of the Windows products and Microsoft products, but I kind of assume that people know about those already. And in particular, the real focus would be about portable plugins and how they're used, and the real focus would be on data binding and MVVM. So really what I wanted to do is I wanted to tell a story during this talk, and the story, like a really good well-known story, starts a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And this story starts on a project for Connect Star Wars. And it was a project called Social Storm. And the idea of the project was that we would take Facebook feeds and Twitter feeds and Xbox feeds. We would put them onto all the modern platforms, so Android to Windows to iOS. And we would, put them together to create some kind of compelling social-based platform for all of your feeds that would make you start talking and help you encourage you to start talking about Connect Star Wars, and therefore you'd go out and you'd be more, talk about the game, and you and your friends would be more likely to buy the app than to buy the Connect Star Wars game. And so we got this kind of as a project brief, as a team, and at some points the team included John, who will be in Southampton tomorrow. It included Matt Lacey, it included Pavel and some of the guys from iOS Bits in Prague. And we got this as a team, and we knew that we would have to produce various layers of functionality. We knew that one of the important layers there, the bottom one, would be the WYSI stuff, the layout, the images, the animations. But above that, we also knew that we had kind of UI logic about, how do we validate when the user logs in, etc. And above that, we would have app logic, because when, a tweet comes in, we'd have to do something with it. So that kind of, if a tweet comes in, do this. If a user tweets a picture, do this type thing. Push it to tweet pic and also push it to Twitter. And above that, we'd actually have the service consumptions and the service use, which was both local users and was also the network users of Twitter, Facebook, and Xbox, and for our own particular services. So we looked at that, and we knew that we would have to put it onto Windows. So we knew that for Windows Phone, we would be using C#. And then we knew that we were going to have an iPhone target. So we kind of knew that because we wanted that WYSI stuff, we would have to go native. So the convention was that we would use Objective-C. And beyond that, we also knew we had Android. And Android, we'd guess to get that WYSI stuff and to get everything working, we'd have to use Java. And this is a small set of developers with a tight deadline, and also with a pipeline of functionality coming in the future. So we knew that it wouldn't just be one release, it would be maintenance and incremental functionality added. This filled us with a, not a sense of joy, but perhaps a little bit of a sense of dread. But we knew that there was this project out there called MonoTouch and a project out there called MonoDroid, which are now called Xamarin Android and Xamarin iOS. And we knew that by applying those, we could turn all of the platforms into C#. And then we knew that if we could turn them into C#, we could probably share the service consumption, and we could probably share the business logic. So we looked at that and we thought, oh, that's good, that's really useful. But then we saw the bottom two layers, and we still thought, oh, we've got problems there, because on Windows Phone we knew that we could use MVVM, and we really like MVVM because of its testability. We like it because of its the way that it separates out, so that designers can do design work and the developers can do the back-end logic. But on iPhone, we knew that we would be facing UI view controllers and an MVC pattern. And on Android, it's kind of an MVC pattern, but it's activities and it's basically just code behind. And we looked at this and we thought, that's not going to fill us with so much joy. And we just kind of wondered, is there any way at all that we could get MVVM on all the platforms? And so we looked at that and we thought if we could, then we could share the UI logic across all three platforms, and that would be wonderful. And so this was where MvvmCross version 1 was born. And MvvmCross version 1 was all about data binding. So let's come out of PowerPoint for now, and let me just come out of PowerPoint, and I will kick into Visual Studio. And let us do Visual Studio with a new project. And to do this first demo, I'm going to use something called a Ninja Coder for MvvmCross. And the Ninja Coder for MvvmCross is a community project that a guy called Adrian's produced for us. And it allows you to add lots of UI projects and create new solutions very quickly. So what I'll do is, this is my South run through. So I'm going to create it in a folder called South run through, and I will call this South, just as a project name. And rather than doing a file new wizard here, what you can do is you can actually create all of these platforms together. So we're going to create everything from WebPF through to iOS to Droid and this core project. Hit OK and let it do its stuff. There'll be a couple of dialogues, no doubt, as it comes through, because there's some other things I could update. But what you should see this do is it will create a core library, which is where our view models and our app is going to sit. It's going to create a tests library, which is just going to be enable us to write tests against that core. It's going to create a Droid library. It's going to create an iOS UI. It's going to create a Windows Phone UI, a WebPF UI, etc. And when it's finished, let's just see, it opens up a README. And you can see we've created all of these things. And let's just go quickly and do a build solution, rebuild solution. Let's get everything built. And hopefully what you should be able to see when this runs up, so this should be hidden. Let me just see if I can auto hide my taskbar, auto hide. Okay, so it is there. Get rid of that if I can. No, it doesn't want to hide. Okay, so what we should be able to see at this stage is that if you, don't know why it's not behaving itself, everything built, I'll bring this up, everything built when we did a rebuild all, but what we can now do is we can take a look at what's in the core, and what's in there is there's an app, which is just the core central place where all of our projects will start, all of our view models will be created, and all of our services. And in there also we have a first view model, and this first view model has a property and it has a command, and it's just basically a hello. So let's just change this to hello South, so you know it's a live demo, and rebuild that. And then let's take a look at this in action. So if we run up what it's created as a WebPF project, and we can run it up, and hopefully it'll start in the right window. Yep, here it is. So you can see there's Hello South, and you can see that if we edit one of the text fields, the other one changes. So that's data binding in action for my property, and if you take a look at the XAML that's created within this project, it's exactly what you expect for Windows XAML. So if you take a look at it, hopefully here it's going to be large enough on the screen, you can see all it is a binding to my property. So that's WebPF. Let's just quickly take a look at Windows Store, although this may open up on the wrong window, in which case I don't know how I'm going to change it, but let's just see. So if we create a Windows Store project, okay, how do I change that? Okay, I can't demo Windows Store to you, unfortunately. Ah, yes I can, there you go. So this is Windows Store, and if we change what it does, again you get the binding update. And if we look at the code for the Windows Store, then you'll see that the Windows Store is exactly, again, what you'd expect for XAML on Windows. It's exactly what you as a practiced Windows developer would recognize. It's got curly brace binding with my property, so you know it's familiar territory. For Windows Phone, there's one thing I do need to do just for my local setup, which is I need to change it so that it's going to debug on, let me just stop the current run. It's going to debug on the Windows Phone 7 emulator. And then when I've done that, then what we should see is, again, what we'll have is we'll have a first view, and the first view again is just going to use normal data binding. Yeah, and also just to reassure you, the code behind this data binding is exactly what you expect. There's nothing really in there in terms of code. So let's just run that up. Debug start new. And that should connect to the emulator. And here it is. And once the emulator's up and running, we should get the same data binding that you're kind of expecting, so that if we tab away, it's updated. So that's, you know, a really quick way to see that, you know, you can get up and running on WebPF, Windows Store and Windows Phone with a shared view model really fast using this technique. But it doesn't just stop at this word Windows. It goes on to these words Android and iOS. So let's take a look at Android. And in Android what you'll see is, there is some setup code. It's not very much, it's just basically this class. And beyond that setup code, you then have a view. And the view again has very little code behind. All it really does is says where its resources are going to be located. And once we have that view, then you can see that here's the resources that are associated with it. And in these resources you'll find these local MVX bind, and what this basically is it is the binding property. It's the similar kind of thing to what you have in the XAML. And what you've got here is you've got a bind for the text property to my property on an edit text, and an edit text is basically a text box. And you've also got a text view, which is a text block, and again you've got a bind for that saying bind the text to my property on the view model. So let's see if this one builds and runs. Let's have a go. Debug start new, and that should come up in this emulator. So here it runs up your app name, and what you can see is you get this, and you actually get a different, oh sorry about the emulator keyboard, but you get a different type of binding here where it's much more dynamic and instant. Sorry about that screen resolution issue there on the keyboard. So that is the droid working. And then let's also take a look at iOS, and to do iOS we do have to set it as the startup project. And we do have to say that we would like it, oops, there's a little problem there with my setup. We would like it to be iPhone Simulator, and maybe we also, that's the Android one. Okay, we'll probably have to run this twice to actually get it running. But what you'll see in iOS is we don't really have an XML format. We kind of have more imperative UIs set up. But in the iOS project we do have this setup.cs, which again is a very small bit of boilerplate code. But we then have a first view. And in the first view we create our UIs using kind of, put this there, a label, put it there, put a text field, which is a text box and edit text, put it there. And then we have this syntax here, this fluent syntax for binding. So this fluent syntax basically here says, bind my label to my property, bind my text field to my property. So let's try running this up. And to do this I'll need to run it twice, I think, because I think it'll complain first time. And I may even, I think it's this one that should work. Okay, so let's connect to that. And I'll also need to set up a remote desktop for you. So let's just do that. Okay, so let's, while we wait for that to start, let's just attach to the Retina simulator and go again. Right, so what we need to do is just to enter a password to get into my remote desktop. And we may need to enter another one here. Okay, we're almost in. Okay, and at the moment what's happening across the network, and you just see it launching, is my new project is launching, and hopefully here you can see Hello South, and if I click on one of these and start typing, then you can see the data binding has just kicked in. So that is a really quick demo, a really brief introduction into how binding can work. And let me just extend that demo just a little bit, because obviously all I've shown at the moment is binding to one text field. Let us take our my command and show you how you can also bind to things like taps and to button presses and everything else. So with my command, let's just change this one. So we've got a my command here, and what it's saying is when a my command gets executed, this one currently tries to do a navigation. Let's not do a navigation because that's not very easy to demo. What I'd like to do is that when my command gets executed, I would like to change my property to, it's live dim. So that's what's going to happen when my command is executed. And that's all in the view model side, and that's going to be shared across all of our projects. So let's just check that I haven't done any typos and that builds. With that done, we can then integrate it into iOS and into Droid. So let's start with iOS, and what I'd quite like to do is, let's say that when we tap the UI label, this first thing, then I would like to fire the my command. So to do that, all we do is we're going to just use a set.bind the UI label for its tap, so we can just add a tap. And what I'd like to do is when that gets fired, I would like to, when it gets tapped, I would like to fire my command. So let's see whether or not that runs, and let's do a debug start new. And that's going to build, and then it's going to deploy over the network, and there'll be some talking while I wait for that to go. But you can see there, I could have added a new button or anything, but you can see that what I've done is I've added a bit of functionality to the view model for this command, and hopefully that's just going to fire through, and with one little bit of binding I should now be able to tap my label, and when I do, it changes the text. So again, if I do data binding and I tap it a second time, we get that through. So that was that binding for a command done in iOS. Let's see whether or not we can do the same binding for Android, sorry. And to do this time I will actually not tap on there. What I'll do is I'll just copy this across, and I will do a button, and let me give this button a label. Yeah, and there is a designer for this as well. So you don't have to do this using just XML editing if you want to. And so I've got a button, and I've set its text to life, and what I'd like to do is, instead of binding its text this time, I'd like to bind its click event, and what I'm going to bind its click event to is my command. So we put that together, and then if we debug start new, let's see whether or not we get a button and whether or not the binding works. So it starts up the program. The app's running, I hope. And you can see we've got Hello South, and we've got the data binding we had before. Again, apologies about the emulator. And if I hit life, you can see it changes to its life gem. So that's cross-platform functionality, really added really quickly, but you still have the power and the richness of a native UI. So that is how to add a command. One last thing I'll show you also is that we also can use these things called value converters. And for those of you who are familiar with value converters, with MvvM, you'll know what value converters are for. They're there for when you have a property on the view model and you want to kind of map it into a different shape for presentation within the UI. And to do that, what we do is we actually just create a value converter in our core project in this shared code. And what this value converter is going to look like is, let's call this one a length value converter. And we're going to inherit from MvvmCross value converter, which I'll have to use resharper to pull in. And what we're going to say is that this value converter is going to take a string on our view model and translate it to an int in the UI. And so what we can do is then override, and it'll present a convert method for us. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to override by saying value.length. Yeah, so that's all I do to create this value converter. And again, let me just compile it to make sure it's there. And then once I've done that, I can actually use it within my Android and iOS bindings just by using the name length from length value converter. So to show you that in action, let's go let's do droid first this time. And instead of in the text view showing my property, let's show its length instead. So to do that, all we do is we do converter equals and then use the name length. And then when we run this up, debug start new, we should, I hope, get to see this push through to the UI. Starting up. So you can see here we've got Hello South, which hopefully is 12 characters long. If I delete some things and add some things, you can see we change it. And if I hit the button, again, we get the binding for its life gem. So that's how a value converter is easily created and used across all of these things. Sorry, I didn't mean to set a breakpoint there. And then let's just show you the same thing in iOS. So in iOS we again have this fluent syntax, and in order to apply a value converter, so we've got this line here at the moment, this set bind the UI label's default property, which is its text. We're going to bind it to my property on the view model, and all I'm going to say is I'd like to apply that with a conversion. The name of that conversion is length. And then when we run this up, debug start new, we will hopefully see that in action. So it's going to go across the network here to my Mac. Hopefully it's compiling and sending it across magically. There it goes, it started. And when it starts, you can see here the label now has 12 on it, which is the length, and if I delete a few characters you can see it go down, and if I tap on the label I get 13 and it's life gem. So that's a really quick introduction to data binding within a UI, to using commands as well as using properties, and to using value converters to change the way that properties are shown. Okay, so I hope that was reasonably useful, and I'll just go back to slides for a moment, because that really was the core of what MvvmCross version 1 was about. It was about getting data binding and getting view models and getting views together on the modern platforms across all of them. And as you can see, what we did was we took the Windows syntax for binding, we created a slightly subtle different version for Android in their XML, and for iPhone and iOS what we've done is create this fluent style of binding. When you want to use a value converter, you can see that within Windows you have this kind of nested curly brace with static resources, and we still stick with that at the moment. Within Android we just added this little converter equals age, and with iPhone, with iOS, we added this with conversion syntax. We then had, for commands, a similar type syntax for binding on Windows. You just bind again using the curly braces. Within Android, we bind to C# events, and within iOS, again, we try to bind to C# events where possible using the fluent syntax. And that was MvvmCross v1, and it was really brilliant. It was a really stunning, way of developing UIs, developing these native UIs across different platforms, so that users on each platform got their native experience. But that we as developers could carry on and develop code and could test code rapidly, and we could iterate it and maintain it, and it really was brilliant. However, it did have a slight dark side, and the dark side was that we used file linking, so that basically every platform had a separate copy, had a separate CS proj file for each bit of functionality, which made it hard to extend and to change and to maintain, particularly as you were working in a large team. And it was a V1, to be fair. There was a deal of love that was needed to keep it building and to keep it running. And so that was its dark side. And we knew that really MvvmCross at that stage needed some overhaul. It needed a hero. And so we were looking around for how we could make this better and make the development experience less painful. More and more brilliant. And we looked for heroes. Now, where did you look for heroes? Well, we looked and we found a hero inside Visual Studio. And the hero was the portable class library. And the portable class library option is in File New Project. And it was been around since, I think, 2010. But in last year, in 2012, 2013, it really got revamped in Visual Studio 2012 because there was a whole load of new options added. And what a portable class library allows you to do is that when you choose this option, then you get a dialog that looks like this, and it says, well, what frameworks, what platforms do you want to target? And what we managed to do with a little bit of help from a guy called John Pobston inside Xamarin, who did a brilliant blog post for us, we managed to find a way to get Mono for Android and Mono Touch in there, which are now called Xamarin.Android and Xamarin.iOS. And using those options, we managed to get the functionality shared across platforms. Now, portable class libraries are portable, and as a result, they do not have the full gamut of .NET capabilities open to them. Yeah, you've got to remember that portable class libraries are aiming at things like Silverlight, and they're aiming at things like the Compact framework for Windows Phone, and they're aiming at things like WinRT. Now, lots of those things are compact, meaning that they are limited in their functionality. So there's no way that a portable platform can target everything, because those compact things don't target everything. And this is the table from MSDN about what portable class libraries can do. And when we add in Visual Studio, Xamarin.Android and Xamarin.iOS, then the table looks a bit like this, and this is what we have available to us. So we've got most of the core in there, which is system.datetime, system.string, and everything you use every day. And it really is useful to have those things. Believe me, when you have to code using NSDate on iOS, and you have to code using Java date, which is 0 based for months and all sorts of things on Android, and then you have to. It's so much easier. It's just so much easier to just use system.datetime everywhere and know that it will just work. We then have Link, which is obviously wonderful. We have iQueryable, which is obviously wonderful. We have most of the network class library. We don't have the full web client, because things like Silverlight don't support synchronous web client. But we do have most of that functionality in there. We have lots of serialization, lots of wcf if you need that sort of thing. MVVM we have, which is obviously useful to us. We've got iCommand, we've got iNotify property changed. And we've also got Xlink, which again is very useful because it enables you to do link to XML and to pull back all sorts of services. And there are things like JSON.NET has a portable class library version, so you've got JSON as well, which is obviously for REST services at the moment is the way that people do them. Beyond that, there are things being added all the time, particularly via NuGet packages, and async and await is one of those new things that's been added, and it's in alpha at the moment, so it's not particularly stable, but it's there and it's brilliant. So this is what you get when you get with portable class libraries, and it's a really useful technique because it allowed us, and this diagram is from April 2012, so it's over a year old now, and it enables us to take a project structure like this, which was our Twitter search sample, and to shrink it down to this. And what this project structure on the right gives us is it gives us so much improvements in terms of build time, it gives us so much improvements in terms of maintainability if you're checking things in as a team, and it gives us so much improvements in terms of being able to use things like resharper. So that's where portable class libraries allow us to do. There are issues, however. When you need to use non-portable APIs, you obviously can't use them. If you need to use something like, and this is the example that we've kind of got in the platform, when you need to use, as an example, plugin, when you need to use things like vibration, then you can't do it because that's not a portable functionality. That's specific to platforms. So when you use that, what we use is we use interface-driven development to get around that. And one way of doing that is to use plugins. And I'm not going to go into too much depth on those. But basically, interface-driven development is all about IOC and dependency injection, which means that if you've got a Windows Phone SQL implementation, which is going to be native, and you've got a tax calculator, which may be portable, may be native, and you've got things like the GPS functionality, which is almost certainly going to be native, then you can create an IOC container, a pot, if you like, for those things. You can put them in there. And then at runtime, when you have a view model that needs these things, needs location, needs calculator, needs SQL, then you can just pull those things out using the interfaces. And similarly, if you had that and you were doing it in iOS and you had different implementations, then again you could put those things into a pot. And then you could, in the same shared code, you can get hold of the right one at runtime because you've put the iOS version in there rather than the Windows Phone. So that's what interface-driven development is. And let me just show you that in action. So let's go back to the Visual Studio. And what I'll show it for is I will show it for a SQL example. So let me close this existing project. And let me show you how we do another way of creating MvvmCross UIs. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new solution, and we're going to start, as I showed in that in the slides, with a portable class library. So let me create this in South 2, and we'll call this one Hampton.core, because this is going to be our core project, Hampton, and we're going to hit OK. And we will pull in Mono for Android, Mono Touch. And you have to use Windows Phone Mango and higher, but that's no issue nowadays. And indeed, we may switch soon to be Windows Phone 8 and higher only, because Microsoft have pretty much abandoned Windows Phone 7. So we put this together as Hampton.core. And what we're going to do here is we're going to pull in the very first thing. We're going to pull in the NuGet packages for MvvmCross. So let's do that. And so you go to NuGet, you find that, and the top hit is MvvmCross itself. So we're going to install that. And what that does when it installs, let me just show you, is it pulls in, I'll get rid of the default class one, it pulls in some references. So there is cross-core, MvvmCross, and MvvmCross localization. And then it pulls in some new files for you. It pulls in app.cs, which has just basically got this code in here, which is how we're going to initialize our service. And then we also pull in a view model called first view model, which just has this hello in there. Right, so what we'd like to do is we'd like to use SQL in this view model. And I'm not going to code this completely live, I'm going to use a snippet for it. What I'd like to do is, in order to use SQL, SQL is native, particularly on iOS and Android, also on Windows Store and WPF, etc. Kind of C++ is native code. So what we do is we pull in again MvvmCross, but this time we look for SQLite, and let me get that right, SQLite. And what you should see here is that one of the hits for MvvmCross is that we can pull in the SQLite plugin. So let's pull it in. And when we pull that in, what you get is you get this plugin here, which is going to be our IOC wrapper, if you like. It's going to be the interface. And nothing else. So what we can then do is in our view model, we can say, oh, let me just do it by code that I've got pre-canned. What we can then do is try and use it. So I've got a snippet lined up, which is called kittens. And I will talk through what this kittens does. And basically, the kittens snippet has a class within it called kitten. Yeah, and you can see that is a basic ORM, an object relational mapper class. So it's got an ID, which we've marked with special primary key and auto increment. So if you're used to database work, you'll understand what that ID is. That, you know, it starts at 1 and keeps going up as you add more and more objects to your database. We've then got a name, we've got a price, and we've got a kitten URL, and those are all very simple things. Beyond that, we've also got kitten genesis service. And you can see that the kitten genesis service is just there for us to use random. And it uses random to create kittens and to give them URLs based on the excellent placekitten.com. To give them names based on this wonderful list of 20 names that I found on the internet for the top 20 cat names. So things like Pepsi and Solomon and Butler and Snoopy. And then below that we actually get into the database service. So here's the database service. And you can see I declare it as an interface first because this is interface driven development. What I do within the interface is I get a list of kittens, and I do that using a syntax called kittens matching, and all I do is I pass in the name filter for that kitten. So you know, it's a simple interface. And then we have methods for insert, update and delete, and we also have a property for count. So how is that implemented? Well, what we do is we have a class called data service, and that inherits from iData service. And what we use is we use an iSQLite connection. So an iSQLite connection we can get from something called an iSQLite connection factory. And that's what's been pulled in from the plugin. And it will be supplied to us because by magic, whenever we need a data service, then the IOC container will create one and it will pass in a SQLite connection factory and a kitten genesis service, this thing we just looked at. And when it does that, what it's going to do is it's going to create a 1.SQL database, or it will connect to an existing one if it already exists. And then it'll make sure that the kitten table exists within that database. And then if there are no kittens in there, it will seed some. So to seed them, all it does is it goes around a loop of 100 times, creating a new kitten using that genesis, using that random numbers, and then calling insert. So if you take a look at insert and update and delete, you can see these are really simple methods where you just literally are calling insert, update or delete on the SQL connection. If you take a look at count, and we'll just pull that in as a method. If you take a look at count, you can see that count, what it does is it gets the connection, it gets the table attached for kittens, and then it just calls count on it, which translates under the ORM layers to a, you know, select count star from kitten. And then finally, let's just take a look at this kittens matching, because this is wonderful, because this is C#, you can see. All we've got here is we get the connection, we ask for the kitten table, and then we say please order by price, so we're going to order by increasing price. Please filter by where the name contains the name filter, and then please, you know, ship that back as a list. So that's it. That's all of the SQLite. You know, so that is how we would pull a database into our application. And so now let's try and use that in our first view model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove what's here already because we don't really need hello MvvmCross. And what I'll do is I'll give my view model a private iData service _ data service. And then I'll let resharper initialize that field in a constructor. And we're never actually going to new a data service, we're just going to let the IOC system, the inversion of control system, new that for us. And so what else do we need in our view model? Well, let's just do this view model so that we have a property, which is going to be a string, and this property is going to be the filter. Yeah. And what we will do is we'll set that initially to be, I think there's a tiddles, so let's set it to T. We should only pull back the kittens with T. And then let's also have a list property, so let's do a PMBX, and we'll do a list of kitten. Yeah, and what this is going to be is our kittens. And this is going to show the kittens that are currently, you know, selected, the kittens that are currently available. And then all we really need to do is we need to update the UI whenever the filter changes. So let's just do that. Let's call update here in the whenever the filter changes, and let's also call update here in the constructor so that it gets called when we first create our view model, so we have data at the start. So all update is going to do, as you can probably imagine, is it wants to update kittens. That's what it ultimately wants to update. So it's going to set it equal to, and let's just use the data service .kittens matching, and let's just use our filter property. So that is our view model. Obviously this is all very synchronous at the moment, and you know it's a demo. It's not for end consumption, but hopefully you can see there how that's used. And let's just check that our core builds. Okay, so that seems to work. So now let's add a UI. And what sort of UI should we add? Let's add a droid UI. And so let's go to Android, and we'll just create Hampton.droid as a UI project. And that goes off and creates the UI project for us. And by default, what it's got is it's got this activity 1 that's just got a button that increments something. Let's get rid of that. That's just, you know, it's not MVVM code and we don't like it. And then let's set up Hampton.droid so that it references our core project. So we go to Solution, Hampton.core, OK. And then let's also go to NuGet, and let's pull in some packages. So what we'd like to pull in order to do this is we'd like to pull in the core MvvmCross package. In it comes. And we would also like to pull in the sequel MvvmCross package. So let's just do that. Where is it? Let me again just find it, because obviously what we want to do here is pull in this plugin that allows us to use SQL. And this time what you'll see is you're actually, as well as getting the kind of plugin.SQLite, you also get a plugin.SQLite.droid. And that is where the native translation actually happens from the interface. The iSQLite connection factory actually attaches to a real SQLite connection factory here in the Droid project. And you'll see that, you know, by default what we've got is we've got a setup which just has this in there. There is a bootstrap file, which I don't normally talk about, but there's a hidden little thing here which is actually how the SQLite gets initialized and gets put into the container. And then we also have the views. So let's just take a look at the views. And the view, as before, just has kind of this, please use the resources for views. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use the resources. And let's take a look at the resources. And in the layout, we have a first view. And the first view is just set up for hello binding for binding an edit text to hello, right? Well, we don't want that. What we want is we want to bind the edit text to the filter. And then we don't want a text view underneath. What we want is a list view. And if you're doing standard Android, this is what you do. You'd have a list view that filled the parent in both dimensions. And however, you know, because we want data binding, we actually have to, we can't use the standard Android list view because the standard Android list view doesn't know about data binding. So what we do is we pull in our own one, which is called MVX list view. So that's all we've got in there, MVX list view. And then what we need to do is we need to tell it where to look for its list items. So what we do is we set up item source, and we set it up with kittens, which is the name of the property, I think, on our view model. Yeah, so we're binding the item source of the list to this kittens collection on the view model. So let's just run that up and see what happens. Debug start new, and hopefully that's going to build. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. And what we should see, deploying its packaging. We should see it'll start up an MvvmCross application. And there it is. And you can see what it's got here is it's got a list which has currently got 5 items in there. It's got this filter, and if we change things in the filter, and I'm really guessing where the keyboard is at the moment, and you can see that the list changes, but the list itself is it's basically just using toString on our kitten, which isn't so useful. So let's just take the next step, and the next step is that what we'd like to do is we'd like to tell the list what item template to use. So what we do is we add an item template equal, and then there's a little bit of strange syntax here because this is Android syntax. It's not that strange, however, I've just done a typo. And this strange syntax is @/layout, @layout/, and then the name of the XML file you want to use. So what we're going to use here is item_kitten. And in order to use that, what have I done? I've messed up my XML. And then in order to use item_kitten, we have to add it. So let's add it, and we will do that by, let me just copy and paste my current first view. And I will call this item_kitten. And what we're going to do in item_kitten is we will have a linear layout. We're going to put this linear layout, let's keep it going vertically for now. What we'd like to do is we'd like to have a text view at the top of the linear layout with a big bit of text, and this is going to be the name of the kitten. Underneath that we would like to have a much smaller bit of text, which is going to be the URL. So I think that was called kitten URL, and that's going to be the URL for where the image is going to be. So if we do that and then save it and then do a debug start new, then hopefully now we should see our kittens in a little bit more detail. So build started. So now when we start this up, you can see here are the tittles, and it's random, so it's a different list to last time. And obviously if we start typing random names, we get there. If we remove all of the typing, you can see we get all of the Harrys, the Custos, etc. And this is quite hard to do without a keyboard, but if we add a D, then you can see we only get fudges and tiddles, because they're the only ones with D in there. If we DL, then we get to there, and if I manage to delete things, if I find something like an I, then we only get the I's in there. So you can see the filters working, you can see the update of the list is working. The only thing we don't really have here at the moment, which we quite like, is the images. So how do we get those images going? Well, unlike Windows, Android doesn't have a built-in image control that allows you to display images. It does have an ImageView, which you can pull in using ImageView, like this. But it doesn't have any really nice way of setting that to an internet URL. So to get around that, what we've done is we've created an MvvmImageView. But the MvvmImageView itself relies on a couple of extensions, and those extensions are that it relies on something to download and cache images, and that download and cache images itself relies on something that can save things to file, which again is really a real native functionality. So both of those are native, and both of those kind of need native extensions. So the way that we use those is we pull them in using plugins here. So let's just go to MvvmCross. And within MvvmCross, we should find a couple of plugins. One of them is File, and the other one is Download Cache. And if we install those two plugins, then we should be able to use MvvmImageView. So let's do this. What I'll do is I'll change this from a vertical layout to a horizontal layout. And what I'll do is I will give my MvvmImageView a fixed height and width. So let's give this a fixed height and width of say 100 device independent pixels and 100 device independent pixels. And then let us take our kitten URL, and instead of binding to the text, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bind to the image URL on the image view. So let me get rid of this boring bit of text view. And so all I'm doing is within my kitten item, I'm just setting up this image URL. So let's see whether this works. Debug start new. So that should deploy, and now when we load, we should get some kittens. So there are our kittens and our images, and we've still got this data binding, although it's very fiddly to work without the keyboard. And you can see how everything is bound together. So that's a very brief introduction to lists and a very brief introduction to plugins and to IOC. So what we've got, and I hope you've just seen, is lists. If you'd done it in Windows, this is the way you would have done it. You would have had kind of an item template, or perhaps you've had an item template selector if you've got polymorphic lists. And within each list item, you just bind using curly braces. Within Android, we had a very similar thing, using an item template. And if you were doing it within iOS, and I'm not demoing that live at the moment, but I can do that if we've got a bit of spare time. And there are plenty of samples out there now which do this. So there's a whole series of 31 videos and growing called the N+1 videos, where this is done several times. Lists are very common within mobile apps. Then you can see what we do is we use the fluent binding again, and within each binding cell we do sub-binding. So it's exactly the same principles. And this is the way that you would set up the sample for iOS if you wanted to do a pretty sample. You do really have to use the Mac still at the moment if you want to do it on iOS, because you still have to use the designer in order to set up a nice UI in a quick time. And hopefully what you've seen throughout that is you've seen kind of some plugins. You've seen download cache and file and SQLite used. There are plenty of others we've built, including camera, including networking things, including color and visibility, basic stuff. We've done some localization ones so you can internationalize text. But the important thing here is that this list is extensible, so you can add your own plugins. You're not relying on MvvmCross to do anything. And MvvmCross is open source, so you can take a look at how they're built. It's really straightforward to do. And what you need to build a plugin is you need to build a core part, and that's got a very simple interface within it normally, and it just has this boilerplate code called a plugin loader, and that's it. That's your entire DLL, that's your entire assembly. And then you have the platform specific part. So here we've got the example which is for vibration for droid, and the platform specific part uses all kinds of Android specific services. So here it uses the Android vibrator service, and again it has a very small boilerplate bit of code, which is where you actually just set up that whenever anybody needs an iVibrate, give them a droid vibrate if you're using droid. And perhaps the most famous example of this was this plugin use was the Sparrow example, which was an app I put together last December, and won the Xamarin Showdown. And what Sparrow uses is it uses accelerometer, it uses voice control, it uses Bluetooth, it uses so many different native things. It uses the camera as well. And at Evolve this year I managed to get a quiet moment one morning with 7 Sparrows, 1 phone. Hopefully you can see them all moving in unison. Sorry about DJ Sai. Okay, so the important thing here is that this is, NVVM code driving this. Yeah, changing the colors, making them move, making them spin. All of this is being done from NVVM code, and in fact this is being done from async await code, because that was the easy way of getting these things to dance. So this is what is at the core of MvvmCross and is at the core of these plugins. It's to enable functionality like this. It's not necessarily to make you listen to DJ Sai, however. So I'll move on from that. And that was MvvmCross vNext. And MvvmCross vNext was, really, really, really nice to use. It was all about PCLs and plugins. We did have to, put in some backdoors into Monodroid and Monotouch to make PCLs and plugins work. And in the last week, Monodroid, Xamarin.Android, and Xamarin.iOS have officially launched their plugin support and their PCL support, so that's brilliant. But that was MvvmCross vNext, and it really, 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 really was amazing, and it really is a lovely platform to use vNext. And lots of people have built things on top of it. Lots of platforms and apps launched using it. It was much better received, and we did seminars on it and all sorts of things, and talks, and it's a really nice platform to work. However, it did have a slight dark side, and the dark side was that it still was a bit of a learning cliff, not a learning curve to get started, because you had to learn quite a lot about different platforms, and you had to learn some of our idiosyncrasies in our version 2. Generally, we also didn't really do binary distribution very well. Instead, we made people kind of copy the source and build it themselves. And we got a bit verbose in some of our class names. So some of our class names were very, very, very long class names, and this was didn't help with usability or with readability of code. So we kind of knew that MvvmCross needed to evolve. And that's exactly what we've done. And you know, starting kind of December last year, January this year, we've been working hard on version 3. And the path to evolution that we've been moving along is one that's going from MVC, which kind of came out of Xerox. Everything comes out of Xerox PARC eventually. It kind of came out of Xerox in the 70s. So that's how old MVC is. And I've got nothing against MVC. It's obviously doing wonders for ASP.NET code compared to web forms. You know, Rails is very good on it. Lots of JavaScript UI code is MVC. Most iOS apps are MVC. So, you know, it's a really well-established, really successful platform. But it does involve the controller in the middle there being a bit, you know, it knows too much about the view and it knows too much about the model, and it's kind of hardwired as code goes. So that has evolved, and that evolved in the middle of the 2000s, particularly thanks to Microsoft, John Grossman and team on Longhorn, you know, Vista and WebPF. And it evolved so that you could take your view and you could digitize it into simple properties and simple commands or actions. And then you could bind them together using a data binder, and this gave you freedom for the designer, it gave you freedom to test, and you know, it really is an evolution from MVC. And you're seeing this now in JavaScript frameworks as well. So many of those are now MVVM. But where we're moving, where we're evolving at the moment, is towards MVX. And MVX is model view cross-platform, and it's model view multiple views. And you can see that, you know, if you have different views, and perhaps these aren't just views which are you know, different mobile phones. Perhaps these are different form factors like tablets and desktop. Perhaps these are different form factors like TV and like Google Glass. So you can see that the rate of change is increasing, but you still want to be able to share these view models and share your backend services if you can. And that's what model view cross-platform is about. And that's the path of evolution we're on. And some of the things that we've evolved down in this version 3 are things like Core Cross, which was an attempt to get the core of MvvmCross, kind of real core functionality, the plugins and the IOC, and to put that into its own library so that it can be reused. Swiss binding was every binding you've seen today is Swiss binding. It's much cleaner. We removed various bugs like Heisen bugs, the famous Heisen bugs, which we've also added weak references to make sure that we can clean up memory more efficiently. We've added more convention over configuration, so that if you, for example, take a look at all the platforms we've seen today have been first view and first view model, and there's been no hard wiring of those two things together. It's just the fact that one's called first view, one's called first view model. So MvvmCross knows those two things together. We've really cleaned up the code in version 3, so there are less namespaces, cleaner view classes, etc. We've added support for new platforms like Android fragments. For WebPF has been added. WebP and WinRT share more code. We've added, especially on the UI side, we've added a lot of improvements to NuGet distribution. We've added a lot more samples so people can help with the learning clip. We're working on better docs, and we're working on more video tutorials. And you know, we also, at the bottom there, are really welcoming Xamarin producing official PCL support. So this is great news. And some of those things are still in progress, so those are the things highlighted there in yellow. So we're not quite at release on version 3, but we are getting closer every day, and we're working really hard towards it. And this is version 3 Hot Tuner, and some of the demos I could show for version 3 Hot Tuner. If I just show something like fractals, so this again is, you know, it's not your typical NVVM sample, it's not your typical thing, but what we've got here is we've got a couple of bound controls and then one big bound image view in the back. And these fractals are generated in real time by a background task, and you know, using Mandelbrot. And you can see that we have this same sample running on iOS, on Android, and on Windows Phone, as well as on Windows Store. And it's a really good example for how to do data binding and for how to pull things together. We've got more value converters, so hopefully there's a value conversion sample. And the value converter shows you how to do value conversion on dates. So this is kind of your typical Twitter time ago type thing. It shows you how to do value conversion on visible properties. It shows you how to do value conversion on colors if you want. So, you know, here's our red, green, blue. And you can slide these things up and down, and that's how this color at the bottom gets created. You know, also simple things like strings, so that you can see, you know, this is the string length type thing that you've seen already. We've also got other demos like, let me just come across. Like, for example, you could do picture taking. I won't do that because I don't have a webcam set up on here. We've got other examples like a simple Dilbert sample, hopefully. Maybe that one's not built. We've got other examples like Internet Minute, which shows you how to use a counter and also how to use a messenger, because messengers are quite common with MVVM. And our messenger uses weak referencing by default so that it doesn't cause leaks. And this just shows you, and this is from an infographic that I think Intel produced. It shows you how quickly things are happening. So this is the real-time count, or real-time approximate count, for how many Google searches are going on, how many YouTube videos are being uploaded. It's a scary numbers that come through here, the scariest being the emails sent. So that's some examples of things which ship out of the box now. They're just in a repo, so they're completely open source that you can use if you want to get started with MvvmCross. And all of these are typically available on 4 platforms at least. Sometimes we also ship the WPF samples, but I don't personally develop in WPF, so that tends to lag a little bit behind. And those are the things that are in MvvmCross v3, and it's a lovely platform, and it doesn't yet, and we haven't yet found what its dark side is. But we are still growing, and everything we've done has been built with awesomeness from the community. So these are badge winners from this year. These are guys who contributed hugely, and some of them you can see there are multiple badge winners. Cannot thank these guys enough. It's awesome what they've put into the project. And some of the apps that have been built. So we started today talking about Connect Star Wars, and so this was the promo video for the first Connect Star Wars app, and this app has now gone the way of the Twitter API because it was only there for a short advertising period, and Twitter APIs have changed, so this will no longer run, unfortunately. But you can see how we put this together on Windows Phone, on iOS and Android. There was a large team, there was lots of functionality we had to put in there. There was a large amount of project changes that also came through from the customer, because the customer was Xbox and Microsoft and was international, and these things are complicated projects, and you need to be able to maintain and grow the source tree. So that is the Connect Star Wars, the very first project that used MvvmCross. The next project I'll talk about is from Bruel and Kaya. Bruel and Kaya are a Danish company, but they're international. They're kind of in 100 plus territories worldwide, and they specialize in noise and vibration monitoring, and they're kind of world leaders in that. And what they have is this Silverlight app, this existing Silverlight app, so it runs in browsers, that allows you to see, on this motorway network, it allows you to see and to listen to audio clips about the noise that's going on. And this is obviously really important for, local councils, for organisations, for governments, and for commercial people who are running factories or whatever, because noise is a big issue. And there are laws about it, there's monitoring about it, you need to be able to pull back logs from the past about it, and this is where Bruel and Kaya specialise. And they had this Silverlight app, and then you needed to get hold of this same data on their phone. So they could have tried to do some sort of web app, but that wasn't what users wanted. They wanted a rich, delightful user experience. So what they did was they took their Silverlight code and they applied MvvmCross, and they managed to get maps working, and they managed to get their heat charts working, they managed to get their kind of time charts working. And it's a really good example. I didn't have nothing to do with this project. It's mainly from a guy called Cheese Baron in Denmark, if you meet him on the forums, a guy called Thomas. And it's a really good example of not just binding simple data, but binding really complex data sets to 3 UIs on 3 different platforms, but sharing the core code and not losing your hair as you get the maintainability of a long-term product and project, which is really important to your enterprise. The second example I'll talk about is a company called Central Stage, and they're kind of UK based but also based in South Africa, and they do auditing for large enterprises and small enterprises and medium-sized enterprises for their network. So it allows network admins to run a service on each PC or Mac, and they can log in there and they can check what's happened, and they can remotely install patches and virus updates, antivirus updates, and anything else they need to. By default this is kind of web based, but they needed to get onto admins' phones, and admins' phones were typically iPhones, so they started with iPhones, and then they also ported this now to Android, and you can see the type of functionality they've exposed by doing this. And now they're building this across into Mac desktop, and they're the only guys so far who've got a Mac desktop version of MvvmCross. We're just waiting on a small fix for PCL, and then we'll also hopefully follow them. But you know, it's a really impressive platform because it shares code across all three. It's C# code. Anybody on the project who runs C# can develop in the Mac or in the PC or in the Droid or in the iOS code, and it's really useful. Aveva, obviously you guys in the UK will know who Aveva are. It's a very large insurer, and what they put together is this driving app called Aveva Drive, and it's been showcased this week at Tech Edge Europe. Okay, so I won't make you listen to the sound, but basically what this is it's a app that connects to GPS, runs a background service, monitors your turns, your braking, your acceleration, and then kind of gives you a score out of 10, allows you to share that score, gives you badges for how well you've scored, but also gives you a discount. And obviously being an insurer, they wanted to make sure this really works, so there's lots of test code in place for this. There's lots of actuaries who are checking that they're not giving away discounts they don't need to. And it's shared code across Android and iOS, testable code across Android and iOS, and that's what Aveva Drive is. And they were working on the very first version of MvvmCross as well, so it's been around for over a year now, I guess, this project. Finally, I'll talk about the British and Irish Lions app, which is out currently, and obviously the Lions tour is on currently in Australia. And this is kind of this magazine style app. Here's the Windows 8 UI for it. As well as Windows 8, it's got a Windows Phone 8 UI and a Windows Phone 7 UI. As well as the features you can see here, it's also got live in-match statistics, it's got videos, it's got competitions, and as well as the Windows platforms, it's on Android and iOS, and it's also customized for tablets as well as being on the phones for those platforms. So you can see there's a lot of functionality to build, and most of this is also driven from an Umbrico CMS from the website and kind of cached. And the functionality they built for this is really stunning, in that everything here, all the website with Umbrico and Web API to provide JSON via a PCL code that's shared not just on the client but also on the server. On the client, they've got that core logic that talks to SQLite using C#, and then they've got all of their UI platforms that are in C#. And all of this code is C#, 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 C#. And it means that anyone on the project can work anywhere. And then anyone can spot the bugs anywhere and can work out how the code works anywhere. And it just means that it's more maintainable, as they've had to do releases first for the squad announcement, then for the live matches. They've been able to do it with relative ease because it's all in C# and they can just manage one code base. And in terms of numbers, this is a slide they produced for the very first version. And there are a couple of numbers here which don't look that good, in fact. Things like the iPhone and iPad numbers. And the reason for that is because they wrote a lot of imperative code to build their UI. And they did that because the alternative of using these XIB files, SIBs or NIBs, on iPhone and iPad just didn't really play well in Teams and didn't really play well in source control, because they are very unfriendly files, the iOS files for source control. You just can't merge them, for example. So that was that is their kind of breakdown of code. And the important thing here isn't really the percentage of shared code. The important thing here is the fact that the code they really needed to share is shared. And all the complexity in the core, where they did caching and they pull in image caching and then they talk to the nodes and they build up this CMS structure, that is all shared, and they only had to write it once. So that is MvvmCross and some of the platforms that are using it. But MvvmCross is still very much learning and growing and evolving. Learning is really what we do every day and what we continue to build and grow. And the story we've been through and I've taken you through during this video is that version 1, back November 2011 to March 2012, was all about the basic platforms, these kind of future platforms, but the core of our projects, and making sure that they all had a standard for data binding and a standard for iNotify property changed. Version 2 was adding in these PCLs and the plugins. We did also add in some platforms, and that was released really in October last year. And then version 3, all of the effort since then, which is hopefully culminating soon. It depends a bit on how well the PCL integration goes and how well we get to build the remaining documents. But version 3 is all about making the code clean, making it more reusable, making it easier for developers, and that is hot tuna. But beyond that, we're still learning, we're still playing, and there are things coming up, like we'd like to see if there are different ways of building view models, because iNotify property change is one way of building a view model, but things like knockout in the JavaScript world have really changed the way we're looking at things. And there's an idea called Rio where we might change the way we actually build view models. And also we're looking at binding, and is there a way we can change the world of binding as well? Because we've got Windows binding, which has been around since 2005 and hasn't changed that much. If anything, it's shrunk since 2005 with things like multi-binding being removed. And we're just looking at, are there ways that you could do different things there? Async and reactive and all those sorts of functional ideas are coming in and changing the way that people develop, and we'd quite like to look at that as well and see if there's ways that can change. Also, views is the idea of are there some views that could be shared cross-platform, and perhaps tied to that is Windows Dialog. F# is more functional ideas, and it's great that Xamarin are now supporting F#, and we'd quite like to see if we can use F# more. Fody is tied in with view models. Fody is a aspect-oriented programming tool. It's a bit like PostSharp, if you like, but it's free, it's open source, and it allows you to redo the way you do view models. I'll show you a clip of that in a moment. Things like the IDE, so there's Ninja IDE within Visual Studio, which is what I did the first demo in. There's also a demo there's a work in progress for Xamarin Studio on the Mac as well. Designers, we'd love to get integrated more into the designers, because I'm an XML junkie and I keep just manually hacking XML, but more integration into the Xamarin designers and into Blend would be brilliant. Things like Protopad and Zib3 and all of these open source libraries, we'd like to get more and more integration with them, and we'd just like to look at other patterns for building things. So a couple of those as examples. This is F#, a guy called Juan Gomez has produced. And this is what a view model and an app looks like in F#. I don't think this is a particularly advanced example, but you can see how the code can shrink down, and you can see that if you did have other services that were perhaps more functional, perhaps more mathematical, you could write those really succinctly in F# and then get those pulled into your C# view project or your F# view project. So the interoperability between F# and C# is a major advantage. And I'm hoping that we're going to see a lot more F# in terms of MvvM in the future. We then have this example of Fody, and this is a bit out of focus, sorry, but you can hopefully see there that by using Fody, this developer, which is this developer Twingui, has managed to pull the verbosity, the kind of raised notify property change. He's managed to pull it out of the view model, and he's just done a blog post yesterday about how to do this, and it looks incredibly simple. So I want to give this a go very soon. This may not be to everyone's taste. You may not like having your code manipulated after compile, but that's a choice. But overall, it looks stunning. It looks much cleaner. It removes some of the objections people have about view models and things like that. So that's the use of Fody in aspect-oriented programming. And the main thing here is just to focus on the fact that this is looking into the future, it's looking into new ideas. Hopefully that's the end of what I'm going to say. Hopefully we've covered lots of this during the session, and in particular hopefully we've covered using portable plugins to get hold of native features, and especially hopefully you've got some view of MvvM and data binding on Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android. So my hope is, at the end of this, my hope is that if you are facing a challenge and you need to get onto these new mobile platforms, then I hope that you can keep calm, and I hope that you can write some code. I hope that you maybe get to use MvvmCross, because MvvmCross is the unicorn of MvvM frameworks, and that I hope that you get to build exciting and amazing apps for your customers and users. So thank you very much for listening to this. I'm Stuart, and there's more information about what MvvmCross is, in particular on my blog at slodge.blogspot.com. You can follow me on Twitter, or you can follow MvvmCross itself on Twitter for updates. And yeah, thank you very much for listening to this, which was, as I say, it's just a demo recording for tomorrow's meetup in Southampton. Okay, thank you very much.